community of Roxbury, Massachusetts. In 2009, she was disbarred as an attorney and sentenced to a 24-month federal prison sentence. Even after a lifetime of work seeking justice on behalf of disenfranchised people, she was stunned at what she encountered upon entering the federal prison system. During my incarceration, I was deeply affected by the great numbers of women who are in prison. Most of these women are serving very long mandatory minimums, guideline sentences for minor participation in drug possession or sales. Most of them are mothers. Their sentences are unreasonably long, the average being 10 years. They have been in prison long after what should be considered fair sentences, while their children left behind struggle to survive. Andrea has committed herself to fulfilling the promise she's made to these women who remain in prison, to speak their truth, advocate for an end to the war on drugs, and to support a shift towards community wellness. Andrea is the author of Upper Bunkies Unite and other thoughts on the politics of mass incarceration. She is also an author of A Letter to My Children from a Mad Black Incarcerated Mother and a children's book, My Grandparents Are Polar Bears. In her free time, Andrea continues developing her education project, Career Roadmap for Girls, www.careerroadmapforgirls.com. Andrea lives in Roxbury, Massachusetts with her husband and children, occupied by James Baldwin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Andrea James to the stage. Andrea James.
Hey, hey, hey. All right, Pittsburgh. It's beautiful to be back here in Pittsburgh. I'm very grateful, very humbled to be here. Full of gratitude for my sister Ronell Guy, Northside Tenant Coalition, who invited me back here today to spend the day with you. I've traveled. Hey, my people over there. I've traveled all over this country for the past year and a half from coast to coast, and I assure you that our communities are starting to come together. I assure you that what you've done here today by marching and coming together to network and to celebrate and to also raise awareness is happening in our communities, in cities all across this country. And I encourage all of you to continue to organize, continue to bring yourselves together. What we're dealing with right now is 2.5 million people who are currently incarcerated in our country's prisons. We have 7 million plus more people who are under the control of the criminal justice system. We have communities and states across this country that have permanently disenfranchised people from the right to vote. There are currently, just in the state of Florida alone, there are currently 1 million black men who have been permanently disenfranchised from the right to vote. So this is why we come together. This is why we try and raise awareness, because of the absolute importance of doing this. Mass incarceration is directly related to gun violence in our communities. When we have decades and decades of destabilization of our families, we have young people who are raising themselves, who don't have the guidance, the direction, and most importantly, the love and the support that they need, so that they understand that currently what our sons are engaged in this country, our black sons are now killing themselves at a rate faster than black men were lynched during slavery. So we have to start to understand what this is going to mean for us if we continue down this road, if we don't find a way to reach to our young people and figure out a way to turn this around. Because what I always say to my sons when I'm going from city to city is, whatever the conflict is, it is not worth self-genocide.
That's right.
The conflict is not worth annihilating the black male presence. And we have to really come together to try and figure it out. Not just with ourselves, but we have to reach out to our sons and ask them what the solution is, because they're the ones with the answer. They're the ones that are going to tell us what they need in order to bring a stop to this, because we are killing ourselves at a rate that is going to eliminate us. And that's a very frightening thought. If you couple mass gun violence and the killing of our sons, if you add to that mass incarceration of black people in this country, 90% of the prison population in this country are black people. More than 50% of the people in the country that sell and use drugs, including heroin and cocaine, are white people. 90% of our prison population, however, and the war on drugs has all been concentrated in communities of color across this country. So when we look at those disparities, when we look at the fact that in this country, the majority of people engaged in selling and using drugs are not the people that, by the majority, we are only 14% of the population. We make up 90% of the prison population. That should make all of us take pause and to ask ourselves, what is going on here? This is not a war on drugs. This has never been a war on drugs. This is a very concerted effort to have a war on black people in this country. And we have got to start understanding that this is what it is. $69 billion a year is spent on the war on drugs. It's spent on law enforcement, and guess what? It's spent on incarceration. What if we just said something else? What if we took that $69 billion a year and we said, you know what? We're going to have a war on homelessness. What if we took that $69 billion a year and we said, we're going to have a war on inadequate education? What if we took that $69 billion and said, we are going to have a war on hunger? What if we did that? What if we had a war against the addiction, the illness of addiction? What if we did that? We would have a very different outcome. What if we had a war against prisons and took that money and brought it back for community wellness for our people and for our communities? We would have a very different outcome. You know, I was in Washington, D.C. just yesterday, meeting with the Black Congressional Caucus about the issues that are affecting the communities across our country. And Congressman Danny Davis said to me, he said, listen, sis, let me tell you what this is all about. This is not about change happening from up here. It's not about that. We can't expect one elected official to make the changes for us in our communities across this country. It's never going to happen. Change comes from down here. Change comes from things just like we're doing here today. Each one doing something to contribute to this change and to this movement. That's how we create change, and we need to do it. So I don't want to be just gloom and doom. I want to give us some opportunity to think about what are the things that we can do to start to create change. When we think about this problem that we're having in our communities, it's a little bit overwhelming. Would anybody agree? And I got to tell you, as I traveled all over this country and been in just about every city you can imagine, the problems are the same, and the people are hurting, and our sons are dying. And it is absolutely overwhelming. So I said to myself, well, how are we going to figure out a way? How are we going to leave people with a message that kind of breaks it down enough that people can begin to make it not so overwhelming and to start to take more action? Because y'all in Pittsburgh obviously have already started down that road of taking action, and I commend everybody for doing that. But what we can do is to just take our block, we call it block by block. Block by block, all right? And we're doing this state, we're in Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania is a voter disenfranchisement state, for instance. What we can do about that, block to block. Not that you're not worried about it, but you take account of your one block, okay? Of your one block. I can't remember the street I just came off of that Northside Tennis Coalition building is on. Brighton. You take one block, just your one block on Brighton, and you make sure that you can account for all the young people on that block. That you can account for who are the families that live on that one block, not the whole boulevard, not the whole avenue, that one block. and you make an account. Who lives in those households? Who are your neighbors? And how many children are in those households and what are their needs? And you make sure as your one block, just as your one block, that you're helping collectively as a one block community to meet the needs, particularly of all the children that are on that one block. And we're trying to spread that across this country. It's called One Block. The second thing that we're doing is we have the Justice Legislative Exchange Network, and it's one of the reasons why we're here and why we're going to keep coming back to Pittsburgh. We were just in Philadelphia. We were just in Washington, D.C. From here we go to Harrisburg. And that is, we are creating all of the legislation that is harming our communities now was created by an organization called the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC is the abbreviated name for it. And ALEC is responsible for mandatory minimum sentences. ALEC is responsible for voter disenfranchisement laws. ALEC is responsible for gutting the money for our public education. ALEC is responsible for more things that directly impact our communities that we just aren't really aware of. ALEC is responsible for stand your ground laws. It's why when our son Trayvon was shot and killed and murdered, we looked up and on the map CNN had about 12 other states that had stand your ground laws. Because what ALEC does is they create legislation and then they pass it from state to state to state to state to state. Okay? And it's resulted in more than 4 million black people in this country currently being disenfranchised from voting. That has got to change. If you are in a state where there is voter disenfranchisement, you must go block to block. You must ask your neighbors to make sure you make it to cast the vote. Everybody who can still vote, make sure you go and vote. Because you're not voting for any issues anymore because our community is in such dire straits and we have such low voter turnout. We're no longer asking people to go and vote on the issues. We're asking people to go and vote for your brother. That's right. We're asking people to go and vote for your sister. We're asking people to go and vote for your niece or your nephew who may be incarcerated, who may have been incarcerated and still cannot vote. That's what we're asking people block to block to turn out to do. And we have a piece of legislation that we're trying to pass across this country. It's called the Alternatives to Incarceration for Primary Caregivers of Dependent Children. And if we can organize ourselves block to block, and everybody who is able will go and vote on behalf of somebody else who cannot vote, not only can we turn around and repeal the voter disenfranchisement laws in this country, we can also pass this very important piece of legislation that provides, instead of somebody who's a primary caregiver of a dependent child, because 68% of our children in our juvenile system have one or both parents in prison, and 70% of the women who are currently incarcerated were the primary caregivers of their children prior to being sent to prison. They don't need to go to prison. They need to be in their communities, learning and helping to heal their lives and to advance their lives and the lives of their children. So we need to get these bills passed. We need to repeal voter disenfranchisement, and we need to get the Alternatives to Incarceration for Primary Caregivers of Dependent Children passed so we can create some better options. I know I don't have any more time. I want to tell Pittsburgh and everybody here, thank you. This is now one of my homes. I look forward to coming back and working with all of you and coming up into the blocks and knocking on your doors block to block. Thank you.
Thank you again, Andrea.